So I wanted to talk to you today about some population policies. Countries have a lot of policies regarding their population. So what is a population policy? This is a measure taken by a government to influence the way its population is changing. And this can happen either for or against the population. So you can have countries that set population policies to try to stop people from having children or to encourage people to have more children. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is pro nationalist, and that's a policy that tries to increase population rates and fertility rates. So, why might countries, want to increase their population? The nation may have an aging population and a high dependency rate. So, remember, a dependency rate is, children that depend on other people, they can't survive on their own, would be part of their dependency rate. So, the nation may have a shortage of economically active individuals. So they need more people in their workforce because once you hit a certain age, you no longer work and you would rely on possibly the government to help support you in the United States, we have something called Social Security that you pay into. People depend on Social Security to live. And in order to have enough money for the people who are retiring, you have to have a large workforce. So you can't force people to have babies. And so because of that, some governments do offer incentives. They want people to have children. And so they offer a lot of incentives to get people to have more children. Things like maternity leaves, paternity leaves, childcare is subsidized, free education, all the way up through college. These are really pro-nationalist incentives to get people to have more children and to make having children more affordable because it is very expensive to have children. So here are some examples of some pro-nationalists. The Soviet Union really, glory to the mother, encouraged women to have as many children as possible to help support the state. These were awards that women could, win if they had so many children. Each one gets a little bit more spectacular up until where you have 7 or 8 children. You're getting this huge medal from the government congratulating you for being a mother to so many children. And a lot of that was because they needed these children to help in the workforce during the Soviet Union, to maybe work in the farming fields or, eventually work in their factories and things like that. So they were desperate to have a bigger population. The best example right now, and there are a couple, is Singapore. They have a worker shortage, right? That's their problem, is they don't have enough workers to support their economy. So what they have done is they've increased the maternity leave by 50% to 12 weeks for the first 4 babies. So if your first 4 babies, you can have up to 12 weeks maternity leave paid. Increased child benefits, so paid families for 6 years if they have children. Sponsor dating organizations to encourage early marriage and reproduction. So they really want you to get married and have more children. Did it work? Singapore's population is predicted to increase from 5 million to 5.4 million by 2025. So, it's working. It's a pretty slow process. They have increased immigration levels. That's kind of a piece of it too, is that not only do you want your citizens to have more children, but often countries will increase the option for people to immigrate to their country, and Singapore did that. So they did increase their total fertility rate from 1.1 to 1.9. But the thing with something like monetary incentives, there hasn't been a lot of research to show it has long-term effects on the population. And the growth is kind of short-lived. So is it working? Yes. Is it working really slowly? Yes. So it's hard to say, you need probably 50 to 100 years to look back on and see if the population increased to see if these really worked. And it's just really hard to say at this time. So I'm not going to show the video in the presentation. So if you want to watch this video, by all means, you have access to the presentation and watch it. So this is it was created by Mentos. And in Singapore, they have a national holiday called National Night, where you would have parades and fireworks and things like that, similar to the 4th of July. But this was a commercial made by Mentos to encourage people to try to have children on national night. So it is a little bit risque. Just know that. So you can watch it if you want. It just gives you, these were commercials that ran on TV. And you can see that Mentos kind of put the commercials out. If you're looking for other commercials, I believe Singapore has some other ones as well. You can type in like National Night, Singapore, and see what you can pull up that way. So if you want to watch the commercial, by all means, watch it. There is another country. It's Denmark. Denmark really has a lot of pro-nationalist incentives, free childcare, paid maternity leave, paid paternity leave. So they really want to increase people having children. So Denmark has a series of videos called "Do It for Denmark," and I'm not going to show it. They're very risque. They are commercials, but they're a little bit risque. So I'm not going to show them to you. If you're interested in seeing them, you can certainly check them out yourself. Again, it's called "Do It for Denmark," but and there's a series of commercials. I think there's 3 or 4. So you can peruse those if you're interested. But it's a way, Denmark has a declining birth rate. It's a way to kind of increase, they're trying to find ways to increase their birth rate to help them grow. So then we have anti-nationalist policies, and that's a policy that tries to reduce the birth rate. Why? The population is greater than the resources they have to support it. They have a very young population. How this is done, generally through education about family planning, offering provisions of contraceptives, or sometimes even rigid enforced policies. And it just kind of depends on the country and what their strategy is. So the best example of an anti-nationalist policy is China. And China, China has an interesting history with their birth rate and with their policies. After the Chinese Revolution, originally they said, have as many children as you possibly can. Similar to the Soviet Union, we need to have as many Chinese people as possible. Well, what happened was the birth rate was really high. And this was in like the 1930s and 1940s and 50s. And what they quickly discovered is they couldn't feed everyone. And so China suffered a great famine. And people were starving, and the Chinese government could not support all these people. So then they started making suggestions that, hey, you should try to cap your family, start doing some family planning. So that started in like the 1970s. Because it's important to know, China has had the world's largest population for a long time, and they only have about 10% of their land being arable. So they have a very small chunk of land to feed a lot, like the largest population in the world. And remember, too, China politically is a communist country. So they were closed off from the rest of the world. It wasn't available. They didn't want help from the outside world. And because of that, they had a mass famine, right? And so a lot of millions of people died. So in the 1970s, they kind of set this policy of, try to limit your, try to limit the number of children you had, but they found that the birth rate wasn't coming down as quickly as they needed. So then in 1980, they started the one-child policy. And the one-child policy basically was that almost every Chinese family could only have one child. There were a few exceptions where you could have 2 children, some ethnic minority groups. If your first child was born with like a disability, you could have a second child. But those were few exceptions. So did it work? Yes, it did. And it worked big time. The total fertility rate dropped from 6 to 1.7. So that was a significant drop. So contraceptive in China is very much widely available. But there are a lot of concerns with the one-child policy. There's a lot of human rights concerns. As you watched from It's a Girl yesterday, female infanticide is a very real thing that happens in China, where they find out they're having a girl baby and then they have an abortion, or they give that girl baby up. It has gotten better in China, especially in the early 1980s and 90s. You would see more cases of that than now. And there is a very large older population, and there is not a very big young population. So there's a shortage of workers. So these were all kind of some problems. If you only had one child in the one child policy, there were rewards and there were benefits. Um, there were privileges granted to one child families, and there was punishment for people who did not follow the policy. And some of those punishments were, getting rid of your health care or getting rid of your removal of your health. So you would have been sterilized. That's a real human rights concern. Forced abortion, sterilization, you lose the right for your child to go to school or even to be considered a citizen. Again, these are kind of human rights issues that are really a problem. It does encourage contraceptive and later marriage. So women have in the last 40 years, women have become very educated in China. Um, and are really a big part of the workforce. But again, now 40 years later, we're really beginning to see, if you look at a population pyramid of China, that there aren't as many women in their society as there are men. And so now men are struggling to find wives. Kidnapping has become a problem in some regions because women are in high demand. So these are all pretty big problems that came out of the one child policy. So the one child policy has ended. I'm not sure what the impact is going to be on China's population. I think a lot of people now are very much accustomed to just having one child. So I don't think you're going to see suddenly people are having 6 children. It's just slowly kind of starting to change. So we will see what happens, I guess, over the course of really the next 20 years in China. So here are some posters and things that you would see in China. Basically family planning posters, how having one child is kind of great. It's what you should do. The more you have, the less they get. 2 is enough. Okay. Plan your family so you can feed them. This is in Kenya. Kenya, if we looked at the population pyramid, would be it's pretty close to a triangle. So there's a lot of people in the younger generations, and it gets smaller and smaller as they go up. So they really want people to use family planning. So hopefully, there's no policy. It's just they're encouraging people to reduce the number of children you have. Same is true in India. These are different types of contraceptives you can have. So those are on posters, and there's commercials. For a healthy family, you need to wait 3 years before you have your second child. So some guidelines about how to have healthy families. Big family problems all the time. Look at their house is in bad shape. The kids aren't dressed. Versus small family, life is great. You have a tractor. Your house is in good repair. Everyone's nicely dressed. So, population is a big concern for India. They don't have a policy. They are a democracy, so people can choose to have as many children as they want, but they have a very, very big problem with poverty and uneducated workforce, which means that women have more children, generally speaking. So they're trying to educate their workforce and their people to have fewer children. So on a side note, I just wanted to mention eugenics. This is a specific social policy directed at managing the population of a particular group in order to improve the human genetic pool. So it's interesting right now. There's some work in eugenics where people can it's called a designer kid, where you can design the kid. It's very expensive. Don't think that people can just do this, but where you can design or get certain traits. In a sense too, we have it where, so I was fairly old when I had my youngest daughter, and we did, a lot of genetic testing just to see. So people do, test things. You can engineer your baby to have a certain eye color to get traits out. But like I said, it is very expensive, but it does make a healthier population when you can do things like that. There are a lot of more negative impacts of genetics. Basically, the promotion of reduced rate of sexual reproduction and sterilization of people with less desired or undesirable traits. So in Denver, they had $1 a day incentive, which was an incentive for women on welfare to use contraception and get sterilized. A lot of societies have, sterilized people with intellectual disabilities, or people who have committed crimes, especially sexual crimes. And those are some human rights concerns. Here in the United States, just in the news in the last month, was the idea that women in some of these women who are trying to immigrate here, who have been kept in like a camp, were forced into sterilization, even though it wasn't explained to them, and there was no reason to do that. That was just recently in the news, which is really unfortunate that these kind of things are happening in our country. That this kind of stuff should not be happening. And this is things that the Nazis did in Germany. They sterilized a lot of people because you were Jewish, because you were homosexual, because you have intellectual delays. Those people were sterilized. And in the United States, we have a history of it as well, as we just have seen, in the last month, which is really unfortunate. That those kind of things are happening. So that's eugenics, not a great, happy topic. So that is everything for today. So after we've done the presentation, you're going to move on to your next thing.